every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards. Welcome to InFocus, a weekly program where we zoom in on what's happening within and throughout the government, your government. April 2nd is World Autism Awareness Day. Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, is a disorder that most persons have heard about, but many don't actually know what it really means. Joining us today to illuminate more on the topic is Alice Francis, learning specialist at the St. Kitts Spectrum Services Center, and Philippe Orchard, a parent of a child on the spectrum. And later, we'll be joined by Janelle Louis Tafari, Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Aging and Disability, as well as Maricia Brown, Disability Coordinator of Services at the Ministry. How do you know if your child is or someone is autistic? What assistance is available to autistic persons and their caretakers? And what can we as a community do? Stay with us as we delve into your government, your business. Ms. Francis and Mr. Orchard, from both of you.
It's good to be here, thanks.
So we want to talk a bit about autism. First off, give us a brief explanation, Ms. Francis, of what autism is.
Well, autism is a developmental disability of the brain that affects interaction and communication. And this can be affected from the age of 18 months all the way into adulthood. However, some persons do not realize it unless a child is between 2 and 3 years old, when they have not reached their milestones. So yeah, it's a disorder that affects the social communication and the interaction.
And so what are some of the red flags that a person can look for?
Well, some of the red flags that you can look for is to find out if these persons are repetitively going over a certain action over and over again, if they're drawn to just certain things that are maybe like a truck, following the wheels, the spinning of the truck, maybe the flickering of the light, walking on their toes. Some persons do not realize their name, they may not respond to their name, and sometimes they're nonverbal. Some of them can be very well be articulated, but then they have other avenues where they're withdrawn, they do not really have eye contact, and they're unaware of their surroundings. They prefer being alone. So these are some red flags. If you see some persons flickering their hands or maybe rocking back and forth, if you see some persons just running around in circles, yeah, these are certain things that you look for. If they begin speaking at a certain age and then stop talking, then these are calls for concerns as well.
Mr. Orchard, you have a son, I understand, who, as we mentioned, is on the spectrum. Tell us, how old is your son?
My son is 13 years old.
Okay. And tell us a bit about the story when you realized he was autistic.
So, to be honest, it was my wife who first realized it. She realized that things were not processing from our son the same way that we thought at his age he would be processing these scenarios or different circumstances that were happening. And more so with interacting with other kids, more so with the social aspect. So when we came back home to St. Kitts to live, we got in touch with the Spectrum Services Center. We asked them to do an assessment on our son. This was approximately 2 years ago, where he was confirmed to be autistic. And from since then, we've been going there weekly and on the monthly basis, as they just recently started doing a 1 monthly program for a half-day session.
Is he your first child?
Yes, he is our first child, yes.
Okay, so you didn't have any, you have to base it on
very,
the fact
very
that
true.
It seems different. You didn't have any other child to compare it to.
So, Kian is not necessarily the obvious, would stand out immediately to be autistic. He didn't have some of the traits, but doesn't mean he isn't autistic, because the Autism Spectrum Center analyzes the varying sliding scale to which autism goes on. It's not just one glove fits all. So I'll be honest with you, I was in denial at first because I didn't know, was he autistic? Was he just a little bit slow? Was he not understanding certain things? So I can easily understand why some parents don't initially follow their gut feeling that something needs to be looked at here. Because I said, when it's blatantly obvious, really easy to find. However, when it's on the not so obvious, it can be challenging to identify. And this is why we're here, to try and make that awareness more open to parents to look for the little things as well as the big things.
Right, and Ms. Francis, can you tell us a bit about the sliding scale that Mr. Orchard just mentioned?
Well, with the sliding scale that Mr. Orchard mentioned, first of all, I must say that it's a spectrum. So on this spectrum, no one person are the same. When you see one child with autism, it's that one child with autism. That's the reason why some persons can allow their children not to be detected by it, because it's not any particular thing that you're looking for, seeing that it's a spectrum. So the scale that Mr. Orchard is talking about is a realm where sometimes some persons can see it and some persons cannot see it. We do not really call it a verbatim, a scale of highs and lows, because like I said, it's a spectrum and all children are different. But like I said, we look for the red flags, and these red flags will tell us if they have autism or not.
So tell us a bit about the operations of Spectrum, how it goes about in terms of making that diagnosis.
All right, so what we do, most persons would call into the center, and they might be referred to by a doctor or by a teacher or relative, or maybe even the parent. They may say, well, my child is not reaching the milestones. So what they do, they call into the center at 669-3767, and we have them to fill out a form, and then they come in. Once they do come in, then we do the assessment with them. So any persons can call that number, tell us their concerns, and we give an opportunity for them to come in and diagnose them.
And how long has Spectrum been in operation?
Spectrum have been in operation now since September the 4th of 2018. So we are fairly shy of 5 years. Yeah.
Mr. Orchard, tell us about your experience. You mentioned that you were hesitant at first to admit that something may be a bit different about your son. Tell us about the experience when you decided, all right, we'll have to contact and seek professional help.
So we got the advice from a friend of ours who was also taking her daughter there to the Spectrum Center, where they advised that some of the traits that my son had were very similar to their daughter, and henceforth advised us to at least open the opportunity to have a look. And so we took the opportunity and we contacted the center. It was as easy as practically possible in St. Kitts, where we called them. Within about 3 days, we had our first meeting with them. And they said an initial meeting to discuss what our concerns, and then they had a one-on-one session with our son. I think off the top of my head, it was an hour long, where they will carry out their assessment. And for us, they did it privately, so your child has no distractions, because we all know what children do when their parents are about. And about 3 to 5 days later, we got a call back to say that after conclusion and discussing it amongst themselves, they recognized that Kian was on the spectrum. And then shortly after that, we had another call to offer us days and times when we could come in for a weekly session, a 1 hour weekly session.
When you got that appointment, the days and times for your sessions, what was your impression when that came through? Was it something, a relief for you? Were you still in a bit of denial, or how did that go?
No, I was definitely not in denial. So for me, relief, yes, but more, okay, now we can put things in place for our son to progress to his maximum potential, because that's for me as a parent, that's the ultimate goal. You want your child to succeed to the best of their personal abilities. No matter what that personal ability is, you want them to get the best opportunity. And that's pretty much what the Spectrum Center does. They try to enhance or give your child the best opportunities. They break down barriers. They help them to get through difficult circumstances or scenarios that wouldn't necessarily be easily achievable in a school environment or even a home environment. So it was refreshing, is probably the word I would probably prefer to use for me as a parent, to know that I've got one more tool for my son to use for the rest of his life. So that's how I felt.
Ms. Francis, walk us through some of the daily activities at Spectrum.
Well, some of the daily activities that we have in Spectrum is that we work through play therapy. Once the parent arrives, we encourage the parents to sing with the child. And we had different toys or lessons, I call them, that cater to these children. And the child may find a toy, a lesson of their interest. We look at their interests and we build upon that interest. If the child likes music, we build upon the music. If the child likes sports, we build upon the sports. So we follow the lead of that child. Once we follow the lead of that child and we find that interest, we see if we can find some sort of engagement. Because most children that are on the spectrum, like I say, they prefer being alone. They will shy away. They will not want you to play. So we try to build a relationship with that child where they would invite us into their play, and hence cause some sort of communication. So that's what we do. We just engage with the children as they come in, and we do not really have a plan for each child, because some children, when they come in, they may want to be able to play with a certain lesson one day, then they do not want to have anything to do with that particular lesson. That's the reason why we say we follow the lead of that child, because we're basically trying to form some sort of engagement, some sort of interaction, so then we can be able to build a bond of socialization.
And so the structures are very fluid.
Yes, it's very fluent. So most of the times when children comes there, they cry when they leave. I mean, it's all the time. They cry when they leave, because we try to build a relationship with a child and try to build a bond within their interests, so that we can incorporate communication back and forth.
And so that is what happens at the time at the center. But what about when they go home, Mr. Archer, when your son comes home? What type of best practices would you have learned from the center that you are able to incorporate into the activities at home to make him much more comfortable and, of course, as you mentioned, to achieve his potential?
So for me, just to add a little bit to Ms. Francis' first question before we move on to that, the center doesn't also just work on the kids. They work with the parents as well, because that's incredibly important. As you're coming on to the next question, you need to understand the bigger picture is, if I help the family, I help the kid, it spreads, and it gives a good environment for longevity. If it's only 1 hour a week with a child is not enough time to impact any child for the rest of their life. However, the way Kian for us deals with certain scenarios or certain pictures is developed from what the spectrum do. So for example, we know what makes Kian tick. We know what makes things go good and bad. And then, so the Spectrum Center have now taught Kian how to manage those scenarios, but us as parents, how to assist him managing those scenarios. Because that's the biggest part of the picture, is that, as you said, no kid is the same, but they teach the child how to socially deal with problems, but also the parents how to socially deal with the child going through those problems. Because I grew up in St. Kitts, and when Kian did something wrong, I would shout. I would say, "What are you doing?" Now through the center, I've learned why is he doing that? Is his actions a response because he's doing something naughty, or is his actions a response to him not understanding how to deal with the scenario he's in?
So that's an internal assessment that you make.
That's how I feel the center help us out, personally. Again, everybody will be different, and every child will be different. So examples that I've brought up, and I brought up before, was our son had a phobia of water. When I first came to St. Kitts, he loved water. Full on would go into water, left, right. Couldn't keep him out of the ocean. He had a few situations that happened at the beach and while on a boat, where he felt every time he went in the water, he would get hurt. There would only be small incidences, but psychologically that imprinted on his head. We then spoke with the center and said, this is something we would like for you to work with. can you help us out? And they did. Over a period of about 3 sessions, they brought it up, they digested it, made Kian understand that it's okay to have an accident, and you'll have accidents throughout your entire life.
Yeah.
But now he goes back in the water. So again, these are the social and the bigger scenarios where they will become withdrawn and stop doing something they might like, but you as a parent don't know why, what's caused it. And the center, because they have the one-on-one sessions, can break those little barriers down and open your child now to start enjoying life again, enjoying the things they love.
So it's essentially, Miss Francis, a collaboration between the parents.
And also the teachers, because as workers we go into the schools and we also encourage teachers and train them how to work with these children that has autism, because sometimes it's a distraction, it's a barrier, it's a burden for them, and they do not really know how to work with these children. So we go into the school settings and we teach them and we train them how to work with these children that has autism.
So is there coordination between the activities at the center that the child would participate in when he's there, and, well, or her, whether she's there as well too, and when they go home? Or is there some sort of a duality that takes place? Explain to us what that process
Well,
works.
it's a collaboration, because what happens is that whatever the parents does at home, we do ask them what they do, and then we try to find activities that would also stem from what the parent do, because we realize that we only are with these children for 1 hour during the day. So we collaborate with the parent, we collaborate with the teacher, and we ask them what they do in certain scenarios in the classroom, at home, and then we piggyback off of that. And once we piggyback off of that, then we begin to share information when they come in. Okay, tell us, how did this work? They may tell us how it works. If it doesn't work, we can say, okay, you can try this. You understand? So it's a collaboration between the spectrum, between the teachers, and between the parent, because we can only see them 1 hour.
Right. Is there any room for collaboration with other groups? Because you just mentioned that those are persons who have direct interaction with the child. Are there any other groups that Spectrum coordinates with and collaborates with?
Yes. There are other groups that we can collaborate with. Cotton Thomas Schools, we collaborate with Addis Place, we collaborate with Youth Empowerment and Disability, and other organizations like that. We also collaborate with NIVIS. Here we go into Nevis and Cecilia Brown School. We do sessions in Cecilia Brown. We do sessions also at the community center. And anybody that wants us to come in, we do go into to those types of areas.
And what age range does Spectrum interact with in terms of this?
Well, that's a good question, because we are childhood development specialists. So we only interact or help children that are on the childhood spectrum from the ages of like 2 years old up to like 13 years old. And then once we're finished with that, then there is another organization that picks that up. But we are the early interventions.
Mr. Orchard, I'm not sure, do you have any other children?
I do. I have a daughter.
And how does the other family members, those within the home, I imagine your wife would have gone through the training as well, any training that your daughter would have gone through?
Not directly related to the spectrum. However, though, as any parent, you would sit with your child and we break down the barriers with our daughter as well. So she does understand why some of the times Kian or my son would not necessarily do the same thing that her brain would process to do. Because that's the important thing. It's not that it's just a different way of thinking, or a different way of processing a scenario, or a different way of looking at the outcome of a solution.
Which is very important, because children often look at each other and see, well, if he can get away with it, maybe I can do as well. So what about persons, other members in the family? How is the interaction with Kian?
Pretty well, to be fair. I must admit, there isn't directly any friction. There will be always times when some of the family members misinterpret scenarios or situations to think, well, why can't he do this? My parents, who are his grandparents, have met those challenges as well. And sometimes we'll sit with them afterwards and say, sometimes they just need to be opened up to what we learned a little bit. So again, although the spectrum do not directly teach the parents or the grandparents by going along to sessions and learning and having a chat with them, it should stream through the family. I think that's down to an individual, like for myself or my wife, to sit down with family members and say, well, this is a why our child does this. Or this is a better way we could communicate with Kian, instead of necessarily raising your voice or punishing, because it might not be that he's done anything directly wrong, it's just he's interpreted the scenario differently to the way a normal person or any quote-unquote normal kid would understand it.
And with that being said then, have you had any opportunity or any occasion where you would need to help to remove him from an environment in terms of dealing with someone who may not be as sensitive to the challenges?
Definitely. Definitely, 110%. There's been a few occasions, and usually when those occasions arise, we sit down with Kian and we'll discuss it afterwards to make him aware of why we took him out of the scenario. Particularly there was one where he was playing football, and he could get really, really, really into football. But so much into football that it affects his ability to process why people aren't doing what he wants them to do. So he will get emotional and he'll break down. And so because of that emotional breakdown, you have to retract him from it for a short period of time, to sit down, to calm him, to have a chat with him and explain why these things are happening. And then if he's willing and able, he goes straight back in it. If he's not, we keep that away for a little bit until he's ready to go back in. So yes, definitely, it is not a bad tool to have, but I will also say it's a double-edged sword. So be aware that you can be pulling them away all the time, and then they're not learning how to actually work through challenges and problems. So yes, that's...
Ms. Francis, tell us a bit about some of the challenges that Spectrum faces.
Oh boy, I'm going to say space and space again. Yeah, the space is not adequate for the services that we do, so we really need a bigger space. We also need more workers, and must I say more workers again, because the staff is pretty small. We also need an SLP, because the SLP...
What's that? That's
a speech and language pathologist. We like to have that on the island because they integrate with persons that are at the spectrum, because some parents may come in and they do not know whether the child is on the spectrum or whether they need SLP support. And then, so therefore, we can then say to them whether the child is on the spectrum or whether they need more support as from a speech and language pathologist. But if we do not have a speech and language pathologist available, that can be very disencouraging to them, and it hurts us because we cannot help them as far further beyond what we are assigned to do, and that is autism. So that's one of the things that we also need to get done. We also would like to have an occupational therapist, because some children come into the sessions and their limbs are not strong enough. They need that support, and that can also be damaging to them. So those are some of the things that we need. We also need financial support sometimes, because a lot of things that we want to do and we wish we can do with these children takes money, it takes funding. So those are some criteria that we really need. Yeah, Mr. Orchard probably can give you some more, because he's of great support to us.
Right.
So approximately a year ago, we formulated a parents group called SPACE to assist the Spectrum Center, because we felt that although the government funded them, they needed a small injection of help where possible. So we so far have managed to organize getting some qualifications, some assets and tools for the Spectrum Center, some toys, and specific toys and games for them to be used. We also managed to get them a laptop and the resources that requires to go with the assessing the individuals, our kids. And the next project, obviously, we were looking at trying to see if we can source funds for them for an accommodation. There is some talk about them potentially moving, so we're kind of holding back on that. What I can say, though, is there are people out there who can practice legally and do physiotherapy, who might be able to offer 1-hour sessions for the more extreme individuals who require it. So if you're one of those people out there listening, this is my plea to you as a parent. A little bit goes a long way. So maybe reach out to the Spectrum Center, see what you can do to assist them with anything, even 1 hour a week,
Yes.
2 hours a week.
Yes.
For the more extreme kids who require it, can go a long way. So I also will say that they do occasionally need volunteers for the monthly event that they do every last Thursday. So if you're unfortunate, parents can't volunteer because we are too close to the kids to do the activities they want to do, and it can be a distraction. So if you know you're out there on a Thursday, the last Thursday every month, speak to the Spectrum Center. I'm sure they can find some way of your help and assistance in working with these kids.
Yes. And our number again is 669-3767. 669-3767.
Right, and that actually leads me to my next question is for you, Ms. Francis, so which would be the last question in terms of, and we would have touched on it a bit with Mr. Orchard for sure, but what can we in the community do to assist? What other assistance can be lent?
Okay, one major assistance that in terms of lending is to be compassionate, understanding, try and find some resources. Right now we have resources at the library that teaches persons what autism is, how to look at children that has autism, because they're sometimes pushed on the back burner because certain people think that they're different, certain people think that they're strange. And like Mr. Orchard said, they just have a different way of thinking and a different way of dealing with situations. So if you can educate yourself, find a way where you can support families, find a way you can support the center, find a way you can support teachers. That would be very greatly appreciated on top of what we have just discussed.
Remind us before we leave in terms of what the number is again, and if there's an email where persons can contact you.
Our address, let me say where we are located as well. We are located at industrial site in the preschool setting and across from TDC. And our telephone number is 669-3767. I'll get back with the email. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that? As well as compassion,
Yes.
inclusion. I cannot
That's
stress
right.
this enough. Inclusion. Most kids with autistic, in fact, any disability, they just want to be normal. They don't want to be necessarily treated any different. They just want to be part of what you are doing, what anybody's doing, what other kids are doing. So please make that be abundantly clear to you and your family. Sometimes it's just getting them involved. It's not even doing anything special. It's doing what you, as any parent, anybody should be doing. Trying to get kids involved and having fun and being kids.
Alice Francis, Mr. Philip Orchard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more In Focus, and joining us, as mentioned, will be Janet Lewis Tafari, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Aging and Disability, as well as Maricia Brown, who is the Coordinator of Disability Services. Stay right here. We'll be right back.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info. If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info. If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to InFocus. As we mentioned, we are joined by two officials from the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Aging and Disability, Ms. Janelle Lewis Tafari, who is the Permanent Secretary, and Mauricia Brown, who is the Coordinator of Disability Services. Ladies, welcome to our program.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
We continue our discussion on autism. When autism really is a disability, can you tell us what really is the broad term that persons misuse in terms of disability, and define the ministry's perspective for persons who are considered to be disabled? Because obviously there are some persons who think that it must be physical, but there's a lot more that goes behind that.
Thank you for having us. We in the Federation, we support the UN's definition of disability, which is any long-term physical, like you said, it can be mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment that when you that affects that when it interacts with any barrier in society, it prevents that person from effectively participating in society when compared on an equal basis as others. Okay, and with regards to being, as we like to say, or persons like to say, disabled persons. In having conversations with individuals who have a disability, they prefer not to be called disabled persons. Some prefer to be called differently abled, while others prefer to be called persons living with a disability or person with a disability. It's like you said, it's broad, and it's just based on who you talk to and what they prefer to be called and the definition of it all.
And we are focusing specifically on autism today. Ms. Lewis, tell us a bit about how the ministry attends to the needs of persons who are autistic.
Okay, the ministry is relatively new. The new administration would have noted that while there has always been support for persons with disabilities, including those who are on the spectrum, there needed to be a bit more emphasis or focus on persons living with disabilities. So since the ministry has been established in January, we have been reaching out to the different stakeholders, those organization entities that work along with persons who are on the spectrum. So that would include the Spectrum Services Center, Addie's Place, and also the St. Kitts Nevis Association of Persons with Disabilities. We've also worked closely with the Ministry of Education. So we have been trying to basically conduct a needs assessment to find out what are the gaps, what are the needs, what are the services that are currently being provided, and how we can further support them in strengthening what is available to them to ensure that the persons who are on the spectrum can be included and able to participate in every aspect of our society.
And in this preliminary exercise that is taking place, is there anything that would have jumped out to you immediately that you would care to mention now?
Some of the things that would have jumped out would have been mentioned in the previous segment. Yes, we do have the Spectrum Services Center, there is Cotton Thomas, but there are some gaps in terms of service providers. As mentioned earlier, we do have a need for speech language pathologists, behavioral specialists, occupational therapists. The current service of just 1 hour a week, it is really not enough, but unfortunately because we don't have the human resources and also the space, they're a bit limited in what can really be available. So what we do need, we need more persons who can assist these persons who are on the spectrum. Intervention, especially at an early age, can be critical. There also needs to be more support for adults because you're not a child forever. You will eventually grow up. You will want to go out into the world of work. You will want to have a family. You will want to do everything that your other family members and your neighbors are doing. And for some persons on the spectrum, they may need some support.
And inclusion in the workplace, Mrs. Brown, is something that it is one of the goals that the UN has set for, specifically for persons with autism, that they would like to see them more included. Persons who are watching would have been able to see the graphic that, more involvement in the arts, more involvement in the workplace, etc. Tell us a bit about what is being done to include persons who are on the spectrum within the workplace here, specifically in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, so I would have had a conversation with the director for Addie's Place, Ms. Latoya Merchant, asked her the same question. And she would have mentioned that just before COVID hit, she would have partnered with, or Addie's Place would have partnered with different business places or entities, institutions in St. Kitts, and tried to place some of the members in these workplaces, some of the members who are on the spectrum. And they were successful in getting that done, and it worked out well for them. Unfortunately, however, because of COVID, they had to leave because of that. But she mentioned to me that there is still an individual who is still working at one of those institutions. But with regards to like a figure to say how many persons who are on the spectrum who are working, we don't have that number at this moment because it's, like Ms. Francis said, it's all based on red flags, and there are a lot of persons who, they might be on the spectrum, but they can operate, like, I don't want to use the word normal, but they can operate like a typical person in the workplace. And a survey was done late last year in November, December. And when the statistics come back, that should or might shed some light into how many persons, or give a figure of how many persons are on the spectrum. But for now, that's where we're at.
Do you have a sense of how many persons are on the spectrum in terms of the ratio?
In terms of the ratio, right now we are going with the universal statistics is 1 in 44. And with regards to that, in terms of boys versus girls, it's 1 in 5. So for every 1 girl, there are 4 boys that are being, I don't want to use the word diagnosed, but with autism.
And we certainly would look forward to getting the data back and learning a lot more. But Mrs. Tafari, it's in reference to the workplace. We know that, as Mrs. Brown just mentioned, that there still needs to be a lot more collection of data done and a lot more persons to assist. But I'm aware, of course, that the government attempts to assist by providing a stipend for those at Addie's Place. That's through the STEP program.
Yes, and that also includes persons who are at the McKnight Center, persons who are a part of the St. Kitts Nevis Persons with Disabilities Association. But the program at Addie's Place at the McKnight Center, it's a training program. So the persons are supposed to attend these centers, they're supposed to learn certain skills and then go out into the workplace or become entrepreneurs. So these programs do need some strengthening. There is a proposal on the table that we actually got from the SKNIS that is going to be discussed further between ourselves, the STEP department and also the associations. We can see how we can do a bit more so that these persons just don't go to the centers on a day-to-day basis and that's it, that they eventually branch out. So we need to look at things like sheltered employment. We need to look at access to finances so they can actually start their own businesses. Look at accommodations in workplace so that persons who, for example, are on the spectrum, they may, for example, need extra time to complete their work assignments. They may need additional breaks, etc. And workplaces can do these little things that can make the world of difference. Because the persons who are on the spectrum, and most persons living with disabilities, they don't want to be a burden. Instead, they want to actually contribute. They want to be able to say that they are independent. They are not depending on other people. And it builds their self-confidence, their self-esteem, makes them feel valuable.
Mrs. Brown, of course, there is a week of activities that is going to be taking place. One of them would be, I don't know if it's a fundraiser, but I would say it's more of an awareness. I'm wearing my pin right here in support of persons with, who are on the spectrum. What can you tell us about a bit about the activities that are going to be taking place for the week? Okay,
so based on the information that I received from Cotton Thomas Comprehensive School and from the Spectrum Center, so today is wear your pin day, but of course you can wear it all month. So if you see persons on the street selling, then I think they're like $2 for one, or you can purchase a bracelet for $5 from either Cotton Thomas or from the Spectrum Center. Tomorrow we're asking persons to wear blue. So I'm going to pick out my blue dress if I can find it and wear that, and encourage everybody to wear their blue tomorrow in honor of those living with autism. On Friday, it's the Cotton Thomas Comprehensive School. They're having a fun day at the park, the family park in St. Peter's for their students. And then on Saturday, the Spectrum Center, they're having a buddy walk that starts at the War Memorial, asking persons to be there from 8:30 a.m. So the walk is going to start from the War Memorial and go up to Port Zante, because that same morning, Cotton Thomas is also having a bake sale. So the idea is to walk to the bake sale at Port Zante, support the bake sale, and then turn around and then walk back to the War Memorial. So those are the activities for this week.
And before we leave, Mrs. Lewis Tafari, tell us a bit about the ministry's continuing effort to educate the public on issues related to disability.
Okay. So the ministry has committed ourselves to more public awareness. We realize that there are many persons out there who aren't really aware of what disabilities are, what it is like to live with a disability, and how they themselves can support persons living with disabilities. Persons often do not know how to interact with persons living with disabilities. Persons, as mentioned earlier, do not know what is the autism spectrum. So the ministry is going to be engaging in a number of public consultations with various stakeholders. We have had the first such session in February with public sector institutions. The next one will be with civil society. Then we are going to branch out into various sectors. We're going to have the financial services sector. We're going to have the transportation sector, the bus association, the taxi associations. We're going to have the tourism sector. We want to touch on everybody. And then we're hoping at the end of the year, we can get a commitment from each entity that we would have interacted with, saying what they can do to make things better or more inclusive for those persons living with disabilities.
And to find out more, how can persons contact the ministry?
Okay. The ministry can be contacted at 467-1393.
Right. You say thank you to Mrs. Lewis Tafari and also to Mrs. Brown. Thank you so much for joining us and highlighting this very important issue. It's, again, as you mentioned, one that most persons may not be fully aware of, although we heard the term, and so certainly they would have gotten a lot of information today. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. And thank you for being with us here for another edition of In Focus. I'm Ian Richards. Be sure to join us next week at the same time, at the same place. So long.
Join us every Wednesday for In Focus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. In Focus, your government, your business.